for joining us. I'm your hostess, Kayla Byers, and this is Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. This season, we will see two debaters go head-to-head in an impromptu battle of wits and passion. Each week, we will have a new judge to adjudicate the round, and by the end of the season, we will crown the winner. If you'd like to hear a bit more information about how debate works, check out our previous intro video. The link is in the description box. With each round, we hope to equip you with the tools necessary to be a critical thinker. This round, in addition to our distinguished debaters, Leah Johnson and Jeanelle Hope, the judge will be Lynetta Johnson. Lynetta is a native of San Francisco, California, who has one son that is 35 years old. She retired from AT&T with 35 years of service as an information project manager. Lynetta is currently working for the San Francisco Department of Public Health as a principal of business analysis project manager. Her goal is meeting the deliverables on time and within budget. Let's go ahead and get this round started.
Hello and welcome everyone to Champions of Discourse Debate This. We are here today with my opponent Jeanelle, and my aunt Lynetta is going to be our adjudicator. This is Lynetta Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Is this how it is? Is that written correctly?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so let us know when the time starts for the prep.
Are we gonna run this as a fact or a value?
I guess you'll see in the room, man.
Okay. All right. I shall
Okay.
see.
You guys are ready?
Yes.
Okay. I'm starting the 15 minutes now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So are you ready?
Mhm.
6 minutes? Okay. 6 minutes starting.
I would just like to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you to my opponent, Jeanelle, for being here. Thank you to our adjudicator of the day. That's Lynetta. I appreciate you. The topic that we are discussing is the protests aren't working. We're going to say the protests are the marching, the petition signing, and the calling of 2020 that was sparked after the murder of George Floyd. Aren't working is taking straight up. It is not doing what it was intended to do. Our criteria is qualitative versus quantitative analysis, meaning that we're taking quality over quantity. So even if you have 6 different arguments, it's going to be more important to have 2 really developed arguments as opposed to 6 underdeveloped arguments. My first point, these people are still free. Like, the whole point of the marching of the protests initially was because George Floyd was murdered and everybody was at home because of COVID to watch it. They had to face what happened. And we saw it with Ahmaud Arbery. We saw what happened with Breonna Taylor. We saw what happened. We heard what happened. If you listen to it, of Elijah McClain, we heard these things happening, and it's something that rings true in Black community all the time when we are seeing this. But everybody was home, so everybody saw what happened in real time. And so these protests, even though they have gained traction all over the world in so many different countries, all 50 states at one point were protesting on the daily. The actual impact of the protests are doing greater harm to the protesters than what we're actually protesting for. We wanted the 4 people who were involved to be arrested, charged, prosecuted, and sentenced. And that still has not happened. We have had tens of thousands of people who have been arrested, but all that they were asking for was these 4 people. But they continue to arrest people who are deemed as looters, who are deemed as rioters, who are displaying civil disobedience, because we want to see these people arrested, charged, tried. We want to make sure that they are sentenced, but we haven't even gotten to that point yet. The protests are bringing attention to it, but nothing is really changing. They don't have a court date until March 2021. But if this were a Black person, they would have been. It doesn't matter COVID or not. they would have been in jail waiting for trial. But these people are able to be free, walking around, living their life, doing what they can. Yes, they have been fired, but that's not enough. They have to be treated as if we are treated, and that is not happening. These protests are still pretty much going on, but all we're seeing is more harm that is being done to the protesters. And now with the government, the federal government wanting to categorize Antifa as a terrorist group. Antifa has no leader. Antifa has no members. And so anybody who they deem, just like they did with the communism thing in the 50s, anybody who they deem to be Antifa can take away their civil liberties without even thinking about it, and they'll justify by saying that they're Antifa, and that can cause major harm, especially to people who don't have the political or economic empowerment to be able to fight against that kind of system. The second point is we have to keep the main thing the main thing. There have been so many empty gestures that have been given by people to make themselves feel more comfortable. We saw it with the white blessings. We saw it with the washing of the feet. We saw the Golden Girls being taken down. We see all these businesses. Nike has stood with Kaepernick for a while. But we see all these other businesses that feel like they have to make statements to say that they are with or for Black people. But even Twitter said that they wouldn't. I think it was Twitter who said that they wouldn't show who their boards are because it's just all white people. You have all these people, but there's no diversity. So there's not really there's only empty gestures of saying that we stand with you, but show me what that means. Are we getting jobs? Are we getting representation? No, we're not. We have statues coming down. Golden Girls was taken off of Hulu because of a joke made that this is not blackface, and they were in fact wearing mud masks. That was actually that show was actually about equality. That show was actually about a white man marrying a Black woman and the importance of seeing past color and importance of seeing past who that person is and looking at them for their heart and who they are. Aunt Jemima, they want to take off the shows, and that these are all empty gestures. We're asking for equality. We're asking for these people who murdered George Floyd and who stood there and did nothing, regardless of how much training they had. If you don't see a person as a human being, you treat them as nothing. And we're just requesting equality. But the police have been militarized, and they're hunting down people. We saw in Wilmington, North Carolina, that there were 3 officers talking about hunting down N-words because they were just, oh, let's do it because we can. And to be able to have that kind of agency to say something like that, knowing that you are in uniform, knowing that we pay your taxes, knowing that you're supposed to be here to protect and serve the community, not hunt us down. Those are the kind of things that,
Time.
Oh, that's time? Okay.
Let me, give me 7. Okay. You ready?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank our adjudicator for being here, as well as for my opponent for laying out the case. And we're going to hop right into it. I agree with all of the resolutional analysis presented in our criteria for today's round. I want to first start by arguing on case and then go off case to some criteria, some points that I have. So the first point that my opponent laid out is that these people are still free. And in particular, she listed out the officers that were implicated in killing George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. Actually, those were former officers and community members, Breonna Taylor and Elijah McClain. And I'd like to argue that that's a fallacy. Half of the officers and community folks for these cases are actually still in prison and have bails that have been set to over $1 million. So all of the killers responsible for George Floyd, aside for one who had a minimal role, are all still in prison. All are still awaiting arraignment and to be prosecuted. Ahmaud Arbery's killers, those 3 are also still in prison to this day, high bails. People are still demanding, rightfully, that Breonna Taylor's killers be arrested. They have been, I believe, at this point fired. Elijah McClain, similar, an officer has been fired, but we are still waiting for those folks. So I want to provide some facts and some clarity here, in that these folks aren't, in fact, just out here free willy-nilly. They have lost jobs, which is a livelihood, which is a slap on the wrist in this case. But they have been prosecuted in the social sense, in our social arena as well. And that these are folks who cannot just traipse around the public without being known, because they have been so vilified and so vindicated. And that is not to excuse the fact that justice is still called for. But George Floyd's killers are absolutely in prison to this day. Ahmaud Arbery's in prison to this day, and they are facing a hate crime. So let's clarify that. Secondly, the impact of this is doing more harm than good. What I'll argue in my off case is actually there is much more good coming out of this than harm, right? And I think we really should sit with some of the values, the beliefs, the practices that come out of the civil rights movement, and that national shifts in culture, justice work, social rights, social justice and civil rights work does not happen without the ultimate sacrifice of civil disobedience, right? And we have seen this throughout the Black liberation movement and struggles. And so to argue that peaceful demonstration is a negative impact goes completely against the Black experience here in the United States, when we know that we have constantly had to fight. And I would argue that what we are seeing from this protest are actually much more unified protests with many white, Asian American, and Native American allies who are also putting their bodies on the line. So I would actually argue that impact, that negative impact that they're making, is indeed a positive one, because we're seeing these moments of solidarity, and I'll go through that. So I want to also get to their second point, and that these are empty gestures. So I have prepared 2 points really to refute this. Yes, the Golden Girls episode, I am a Golden Girl. Thank you for being a friend, fan myself. These sort of statements that are made, that's seen as empty gestures, Nike, probably coming out with some shoe that's real Black power, real whatever, Kaepernick, whatever. I understand how people see them as empty gestures, right? Yes, absolutely. We are calling for very concrete things, justice for Breonna Taylor. However, what we have to recognize that these protests have done is they have changed the national discourse. We lived in a society that was very pro-cop, right? And this moment, 9 minutes of George Floyd's neck being suffocated by this officer, exposed the grotesque nature of police. It showed that America is indeed a police state. Right? We have white people who are willing to talk about white privilege and fragility in this moment, right? We have companies from Zillow who are willing to talk about redlining finally and reckon with this racist past that we as Black people have been told did not exist. White people are now willing to say that racism is real and it impacts us. That's not an empty gesture. That's something that we have been working for since enslavement. Right. With regards to also, these empty gestures, we also must think about the totality of cultural changes and shifts. Right. You talk about, well, is there any representation? Absolutely. Netflix has come out with a statement, but they've also come out with a campaign called Strong Black Lead. Right. We don't just get to see Lupita Nyong'o in a film. We don't get to see all these Queen Sonos and African films on Netflix just out of the blue. It is in part because of this movement that's happening. Hulu, all these folks investing in more programming and shows that will showcase and bring diversity to the representation. I think it's also happening on college campuses. As a professor, I can speak to that myself, in that there are diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, more inputs, more interest in hiring faculty of color, and so on and so forth. Even what we're seeing across this nation, you have states that are voluntarily, in some cases, removing Confederate monuments. That is a cultural change. That is part of also justice seeking and being able to right Black people who have been historically marginalized in this nation for far too long into the very fabric of this nation. And so with that, I want to go off case. I have 2 additional points that I want to make it as far as why the protests are working. One is that we've unified younger generations. Those 2 generations being millennials and Zoomers, who are disproportionately confronted with the issues being asserted within these protests. And that is issues along race issues, social justice, LGBT folks, in particular Black trans women and Latinx trans people who are dying, as well as class. You have Zoomers and you have millennials who are disproportionately who are poor, who straddle these racial and economic lines, especially during COVID, especially coming out of the 2008 recession. We just aren't getting a break. And so they are putting their bodies on the line together and in solidarity to call for substantial change within this nation. And that is huge. That is major. And the second one that I would like to say is policy changes. There have been some very concrete policy changes that have come out of this moment. In particular, the main call to defund the police. We see that in Seattle, they have voted to defund their police by 50%. We see LAPD has voted to defund their police. We see that NYPD has also committed to defund their police, right? Officer immunity is finally being challenged. The reason why so many officers are in prison right now, unlike the earlier protests that happened with Black Lives Matter, when we think about Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin, those folks didn't really go to prison. Folks are going to prison now because officer immunity is finally being taken up, not only at the local level, but also the federal level. And this is being pursued by the Democrats in the House, right? Also, again, we see this in more arrests. There are also other policies being pursued with regards to demilitarizing the police, right? Taking these guns and lethal weapons away from them. So again, I argue that the case that the government has presented is really just moot. Cultural change is important. Representation is important. These aren't just empty, hollow gestures, right? That are being made. These are actual cultural changes. Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yes. Oh Lord. Okay, 4 minutes. Here we go. Let me know when you start.
Hold on. Let me do it again because I thought you were ready.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, ready.
All right, so we're gonna go on case and then off case. So the argument, pretty much, the first argument is that half the officers have been arrested, or been in prison waiting arraignment, or they have lost their jobs, and there's more good. So firstly, losing their jobs should be an automatic. That is a very low hanging fruit. Having someone lose their job because of negligence, because of loss of life, that should be the bare minimum. The sentencing and the and serving time is what the ultimate goal is. And with half the officers being in prison, that's still not 100%. That is a difference in what we've seen previously. But the protests are to make sure that these officers are held to the same standard. They still get preferential treatment. You see the Derek Chauvin, whatever his name is, he's not able to be secured by Black prisoners. There's still preferential treatment with him being in prison, and that is not the same. That is not equality. That is not what we're protesting for. We're protesting so that they can get the same treatment that we would get should it happen to them. The unified protest and solidarity, yes, it's all well and good, but it's not achieving the goal. They still have this, even though their bills are high and all that kind of stuff. Some of them are out. Some of them are not serving time. What we have initially asked for. The second point that I make is that we have to keep the main thing. These empty gestures. Yes, Netflix can do this, and I'll answer this also on her second point. But Netflix can have a Black campaign, and yes, we're changing the national discourse, and there has to be cultural shifts. But these empty gestures are just to make white people feel more comfortable, saying white blessings because we don't want to use white privilege, washing Lecrae's feet or shining his shoes or whatever the case may be, taking Aunt Jemima off the shelves, and even removing monuments. Those are all empty gestures until we see actual, real, concrete change. On her off case, she said that this is a unified front for people. Yes, it's bringing attention, and I've said that in my first point. Yes, it is bringing attention, but it's not bringing any real change. The second point that she said is the policy changes. The policy changes that are taking effect happen if we can vote. Yes, Seattle, we'll say LAPD. LAPD did decrease it, but they decrease it a minimal amount, taking away $50 billion away from 150 billion or whatever the number is. It's some exponential number, but they're only taking away like 10 to 15% of their budget is being reduced for LAPD. That is still not enough. We need substantial, which is 50% or more decrease in order to defund the police. The officer immunity is being challenged, and that can only happen if we're able to vote. But like I said, the voting, oh, sorry. Yes. So because the police have been militarized and they're hunting people down, this is back to my second point, and we're going to extend this off, is that the only way that we can actually see real change is if we vote in the local government, because everything starts at home. But if, just like in Atlanta, we saw they start shutting down all these voting stations and people had to stand outside for hours, social distance, 6 hours to vote. These people were not trained to be able to work the voting machines. And with the policy changes happening, we have to have people in our areas in our governments who can vote for us. And if we cannot go out there to vote because of voter ID issues, because of people preventing it from happening, we see that Atlanta is on the map because Georgia's on the map because of, okay.
Next is 6 minutes. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Ready, okay.
So let me respond to the opposition. In particular, I'm going to go on their on case, off case. I tried to keep it together as possible points. So the first point being my response that half the officers have been arrested and that more good has happened. I maintain this, right? The opposition is saying that actually more, this isn't the case and that losing jobs isn't enough. The reality is that change happens, unfortunately, in this country incrementally, right? We went from being enslaved to Jim Crow, segregation, to finally getting the right to vote. It has been 400 years of very slow change. If we just think back to the instance of Michael Brown, right, where you didn't get an officer arrested at all, barely fired, to now officers instantly are being fired. And I'm not saying that this is right. This is unjust treatment. But we have to recognize that in this moment, this is some very radical change that is actually happening with regards to how our government has responded. They have never responded like this to officers before in the past. This is very much new. And this is only happening because of protests. Because folks have flooded the streets and said this is unacceptable. And not only folks, but also people and companies like Nike, like Hulu, like Netflix, who have also said this is terrible. We cannot operate as a nation like this. This is unjust. This is unfair. Now, with regards to sentencing, I want to parlay to the government that we also have a justice system, right? A court system which is inundated, which is underfunded at the moment, and is also backed up because of COVID-19. Cases don't get tried immediately. A year for a trial actually makes sense. I want us to think back to the Rodney King trial, which took multiple years. So to think that these officers are going to be tried and sentenced within a matter of months is just ludicrous. That's not how our justice system works. We try and operate under the guise of having a democratic justice system. We know that's not the case, but folks are viewed as innocent until proven guilty. And so we have to unfortunately work within those parameters. And some of the protests are calling for change within the justice system itself, right? As far as creating a unified front, the government responded that we need to keep the main thing the main thing. Well, what is the main thing? Yes, it's calling for justice, but justice for Black folks has always been tied to cultural and national shifts. Yes, it's policy related. Yes, we want immediate, material justice, but we also want to be viewed within the fabric of the nation. So when you say that these gestures just make white people feel better, like the removal of a monument, no, it doesn't. It makes Black folks and Native American folks feel better as well, because they are then validated within history. And we are able to say that these Confederate soldiers who agreed with the enslavement of us for over 400 years was right. We are able to take down those monuments and say, no, that they should not be valorized and upheld within the society, right? If we go back to the civil rights era, civil rights leaders talked about this. Early leaders within Black Lives Matter. I think about the young woman in South Carolina who climbed the flagpole to take down the Confederate flag. That mattered to us, and it still matters for us. So it's not just empty, hollow gestures that make white people feel better. It also, again, reaffirms that we matter and are a part of this nation. With regards to my point of changing the national discourse, they're arguing and saying that this isn't really huge. This is huge. This is the first time we're really having a true reckoning around racism within this country, right? This is a civil rights movement that is happening before our eyes on the scale of the 1950s and the 1960s, and the work that King, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and so on and so forth have done, right? And it's important that we write it in as that type of history. We're seeing those policy changes. We're seeing the cultural changes. We're seeing the institutional changes, and we cannot say that that isn't important or drill it down. Now, with regards to policy change, I want to argue an issue of topicality. They keep bringing up this issue of voter suppression. Voter suppression is something that's completely different, right? The policy changes that I mentioned that are happening, in particular issues on police officer immunity, that was written off as an executive order in Colorado. People do not need to vote on that. As far as defunding the police, saying that it's not substantial, again, change doesn't happen overnight. Black folks didn't get made free overnight. It took years, and many of us still aren't free. And so change is change. $1 billion compared to $6 billion budget, I understand. It may not appear like a lot, but it is a dent. It is a small hit, at least, to some of these budgets. Seattle has voted to defund their police by 50%. So it is happening. The change is happening more substantively in other places than others. And so that indeed needs to be recognized. And so what I want to hammer in today is sort of my voter issues and why I won. Clearly, I have shown and demonstrated in my arguments that change is happening, and it is happening via the work of these protesters who not only have changed the national discourse, who are helping to institute cultural and institutional changes within media companies, within higher education, within government via policy, because they are coming with demands, because they are putting their bodies on the line during a pandemic at that, and because they are showcasing the ills and the grotesque nature of police in this country. We live in a police state. We are a country that is currently governed by a fascist dictator, and they are saying that and they are naming that. And the world sees it and is rebuking us as a nation because of that. Okay. And so those are my primary points. Why my opponent has lost is because she has not clearly laid out a plan that illustrates how these protests aren't doing any good. Your response that, folks aren't in prison, half of them are.
Time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't know I was on mute.
Oh, hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Okay, begin.
Okay, so I am just going to quickly talk about the off case and then go back on case and then my voter issues. Okay, so first point is that the opposition brought up a topicality issue and that I brought up voter suppression. Let's understand that the policy changes, we can have executive orders, but executive orders have a time frame on them. They do expire. And because there is not voted into the local constitution as opposed to the federal government constitution, because it's not voted into, there's going to be a time frame on it. So when things start to die down and people think it's cool again, they can go ahead and change that, just like they changed a whole bunch of stuff when they did that when Trump first got into office, trying to get rid of Obama stuff. So all the policies that Obama had put in place. So voter suppression is just an extension of the argument that I made about the ability to be able to vote on local government, which is where we will see the real change. Yes, Seattle is one city in all the cities of the U.S. who has decreased their budget by 50%. That needs to happen across the board in order to show that these protests are actually working. Back to on case, the argument that the opposition stated was just that change is happening and it's happening incrementally. That is the whole entirety of their case. Change is good, it's happening incrementally, and that is going to take time to happen. What the argument that I'm making is that the protests are not working because they have not achieved the goal of yet seeing the officers who murdered George Floyd see justice the way we see justice. That has been my whole argument. Because that has not happened, because that even though justice is not swift as the opposition put it, and it does take time and we have to see social changes first, the protests are not working. We have to do more in voting locally. We have to do more in making sure that we take care of our community. We have to do more in not accepting just the taking down monuments. That's fine. The taking down of Aunt Jemima, of all these things reminiscent of Jim Crow area or enslavement of African people. All that's fine, but they just do it to make themselves feel better as white people. But if we want to see that the protests are working, we have to see not only us recognized as human beings, but we have to see other people who do harm to us be treated the same way we're treated if we were going to do harm to them. And with that, I ask for a government vote.
Okay.
So you have 2 minutes to look over your notes.
Okay.
While the judge is reviewing the cases presented, you should take this opportunity to share, like, and subscribe. You know, all the YouTube things. Who do you think won this round? Let me know in the comments down below. And the results are in.
Okay. My time is up. So do you want me to just say what I thought?
Mm-hmm. And then you would
okay.
just tell us who won.
Okay. I thought both of you guys were really good. I enjoyed it. It was hard trying to keep up with the time, keep up with you guys. So that was I was struggling. But you guys were good. I thought you both were very, very good, given that you just had the topic. The round one, I thought that Jeanelle. Okay. I like the way you laid it out, Deborah. Jeanelle, I liked how she came back and basically was saying, well, let me clarify some facts about all the officers. I thought that was good. That made me go, whoa, wait a minute. The empty gestures, I felt that, but then I thought when Jeanelle came back on, but this is change. So the protest is sparking some kind of change. I like that part. You both were engaging at one point. Deborah, you were starting to, I look like you weren't engaged with the audience, and I don't know if you need to be, but so I wasn't feeling the passion going into the second round as I felt the first round, like when you laid it out, but it was looking like you were not engaging so much. And I was starting to feel more passionate on the opposition side because she was at the fingers going, and maybe I relate to that because I move my hands so much too. The fingers was moving, but that caught my attention. That got me. And then also, she brought back some cases, Black Panthers, Rodney King. So she was using some good examples, I thought, to show how past things have presented change. And I know, Deborah, you kept saying that change was kind of slow, but it wasn't enough. And I kept thinking that what she was saying, it was like building her case, building more and more of her case. So with that, I think I gave the debate to Jeanette. I think that's
Jeanelle.
Jeanelle. Yeah, Jeanelle. I only because of some of those things that I was trying to capture. But then I would like I said, it was a challenge to keep up with the time and to try to keep up with writing my notes and keep up with what was
It's a lot.
It takes practice. It does take practice.
Yeah. I was like, why you guys don't have a timekeeper? I don't know, but it was a very interesting experience. I was glad to be a part of it. But it was interesting because I came in thinking a whole different way until I started listening to you guys debate. So thank you for opening my eyes and ears.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Champions of Discourse Presents Debate This. I have been your hostess, Kayla Byers. Be sure to tune in next Thursday.